Gestalt language processing, AAC, ethics. We are getting into it in a future course here at ABA Speech. Did you know that at www.abaspeech.org, I list all of our upcoming CEU courses? Every single month, I do a live course, either myself or a speaker. And the next coming months for our back to school, I said it, back to school time, we're going to be talking about the ethics of collaboration around the ideas of Gestalt language processing, AAC, verbal imitation. In September, we're going to be talking about naturalistic interventions. We have so many wonderful things in store. Now, these CEUs, you can register for the webinars completely free, and that is going to be a link in the show notes. So make sure that you register. If you want to purchase a general certificate, that's $5. Members of the ABA Speech Connection membership, are you in the membership yet? If not, join us. There's over 300 professionals and parents in the membership. You get your CEUs completely free as part of your membership. But if you're like, hey, Rose, I'm not ready for the membership, that is okay too, because every single month you have the option to just pay for your single CEU. These are ASHA approved and ACE approved courses for BCBAs, professionals, and anybody who wants to attend. So make sure that you check the notes in the show notes that is going to have the link that will take you to register for our upcoming live events around the ideas of ethics, collaboration, Gestalt language processing, AAC, naturalistic interventions, and so much more. I cannot wait to see you on a future live course. Did you know that 25 to 30% of autistic individuals are considered minimally verbal? So another form of communication may be warranted. Today, we are talking with Jean Jarrett all about AAC and factors to guide decision-making. Such an important piece to the AAC puzzle. Jean is a speech language pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst, and she is taking coursework to become a PhD in North Carolina. And she shared such valuable information. One of the questions that I asked her that I know that you'll want to hear the answer to, because I get asked this a lot, is, are there prerequisites to AAC? We talk about that question and so many others that are going to be valuable for you today, whether you're logging in as a speech therapist, BCBA, special educator, or parent. So let's get into this conversation all about AAC with Jean Jarrett.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the podcast. Today we have with us Jean Jarrett. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
And I feel like I am friends with your mom. I met her in real life once, and she was always kind of like a mentor, a cheerleader to me. And I think maybe I met you at ASHA, though. Were you at ASHA in Orlando?
Yes, I was at ASHA in Orlando. Okay. Yeah.
That was
probably
the last time I went to ASHA. I actually am planning to go because I'm actually licensed in Washington State. I'm like sitting here in Ohio, but I've been licensed in that state for numerous years. And I'm like, I'm going to go to ASHA, and I've never been to Washington State. So
I've got about three posters that we've submitted for Seattle. So keep an eye out for them.
Okay, wonderful. Awesome. I love that. So today we are going to be talking about AAC. That is something that is very, very popular here at ABA Speech. Anytime I talk about AAC, people get very excited. Last year, I remember I came up with this free mini training that was called AAC for BCBAs. And I posted it in a Facebook group, and it got 300 comments that people wanted it. I was like, whoa, this is something that people are interested in about. And then we did this course intro to AAC, and I've done it I was doing it like every single month because we were just getting thousands of people registering. And so I'm excited to talk about AAC because it's something that what's hard is that it's kind of like a moving target. It's like there's always more to learn. Sure. It's like we never fully can say we're an expert. It's just, it's always evolving. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
So it is estimated that 25 to 30% of autistic individuals are considered minimally verbal. And so oftentimes another form of communication can be warranted. I know that I find that professionals and parents are overwhelmed / intrigued by AAC. Do you find that to be the case with your clinical practice as well?
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, there's definitely a need there with the overlap of apraxia and autism. We get clients all the time that need an alternative form of communication. But when we do AAC, right, it's a pretty complicated process. You're talking about individuals, autistic individuals are often receiving services from multiple different providers and a ton of different environments. And a lot of these providers are coming from different disciplines. So they have different backgrounds and understandings of AAC. And then you've got parents, on the other hand, who are already just like juggling so much, trying to do everything they can for their child. And it can just be a lot to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I remember the first time, my first year as a CFY, I was kind of like a general school-based therapist. And then the second year, or somewhere in there, the first 5 years, I started working in this like autism specific program. And I remember the first time I ever saw like the LAMP vocabulary, a parenchiromic device. And I was like, I mean, I love it now. I think it's awesome. But at first I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
I was very scared because I did not understand how it all worked. And that I felt nervous about how to prompt my students and teach them. And before I came into this district, every single person from the AAC specialist put kids on LAMP, which that's a whole other show probably. And I love LAMP. I think it's awesome. And the kids really work with it, but obviously we want to be individualized here. This was a long time ago, so there weren't as many choices, but I finally got over it and I just sat down with the device. Now I think it's great. But it can be really overwhelming, even for somebody who has a full-on master's degree.
Right.
And it's just always something new to learn. So, how do you answer? I get this question asked a lot, and I'm curious how you answer this. Are there any prerequisites to AAC? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's complicated, right? Because when I hear that phrase, right, prerequisites for AAC, I think at the end of the day, what happens for me is I go and I think about all of these sort of like catchphrases that get associated with AAC. Yeah. You hear, there are no prerequisites, and every child should have a robust communication device, or model, right? And I think that the issue with these things is that they're just really, broad sweeping generalizations, and it keeps us from really understanding the nuance in AAC, right? And in anything that you do on autism, realistically, like if there's anything that we know, it's that everything has to be individualized, like you said, right? So when I think about, prerequisites, especially, I try to kind of restructure that conversation of, if you're asking me, is there any reason to wait before giving this child an augmentative communication system of some sort? The answer is going to be no, right? That being said, we have to consider the child's skill set when we're selecting a system or a modality that's going to work, because that's our job, is to really determine what is going to be the best fit, and skill set plays a part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, very important. I do get, sometimes BCBAs will, I'm on social media, so that's how I've grown my business. And I cringe when I say that a little bit. My neck stresses. But because BCBAs will oftentimes say like, well, I was taught that there's all these prerequisites to AAC. And it's hard. It's hard because sometimes, the BCBA could be the first line provider that's seeing the student.
Yeah.
Maybe you're living in an area where there's a BCBA ready to go and you can get the intervention right away, but to see a speech therapist is a 6-month waiting list, or, you live internationally and there's just there isn't one.
Right.
So just a lot of the cases. So I feel like, we need to analyze the situation, right? I know that.
Yeah.
I've been a BCBA for 12 years now, I think, without doing the math. And, it's some people could say oh, there are prerequisites, and then they could get really rigid in exactly what that means. We can't ever give this learner a device because maybe they're always going to have trouble with attentional focus. And, so it's hard to say anything, but I obviously it's a case by case basis, which is which makes our jobs kind of exciting / difficult, is that there isn't one blanket generalization to share with people. So good answer. I like that. What can the AAC assessment process is something we talk about a lot. I don't know if you've ever met Barb Weber. She is also a dually certified individual, and she did this really cool talk for us in the ABA Speech Connection about AAC assessment. And one of the tools that she shared with us, she shared a lot of stuff, and it was amazing. Was called the ALP, which is it's free. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Are you familiar with it? No. Okay. No one is. And I feel like this is some kind of hidden gem, not because it's going to take all the overwhelm away from an AAC assessment, but it was created by, I think, a speech therapist and an OT, I think.
Okay.
It's completely free if you just put ALP, and we'll put in the show notes. I have a for that course and for that resource, but it's a nice getting started. It's very user friendly. And so, because I think AAC assessment kind of makes people feel very overwhelmed. I know that it does. So what do you think that we can do as professionals to feel a little more comfortable with that process?
Are you like us and have 2 little rugrats running around at home?
Then you might enjoy our podcast, which is all about parenting with babies and toddlers. Come and join us in our imaginary blanket fort for some conversation. Why should people listen to us?
We're married.
Emma over there is an identical quadruplet. And I'm...
You're an only child, and he's generally a bit wacky.
If you want a celebrity or a professional or good advice, then we are not for you. I'm a very involved dad as well, so we have a dad and mum perspective.
It's just nice to have a chat with you, honestly. Once a week. Quite nice.
Go check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Don't wake the baby.
Yeah, I agree that assessment for AAC can be really overwhelming. I think that there are things, we're kind of used to these speech and language assessments where we've got these standardized tests that we want to do, right? And it kind of gives us a language score, an articulation score. And we're great, that's pretty cut and dry, pretty clean. It might be a little bit more complex depending on the skills of the learner. But with AAC, I really look at it through a completely different lens. And maybe this is because, my area of research interest is implementation science. And I really feel like AAC is an area where when you look at the breakdown, right, of why we have these kids with devices that aren't being used, or why there's all of these, differences in children who are picking it up and using it really well versus children that just aren't, right? That it's really less about the modality and more about the implementation. And I think for assessment, it's incredibly important to look at the entire picture. You have to look at who are the communication partners going to be, what environment are they going to be using the device in, who's going to be responsible for programming it, right? Figuring out the roles and responsibilities of everybody that's going to be participating in it. Really requires so much collaboration, and you have to consider so many different things to be able to find the best fit. That I really like looking through that sort of implementation science lens to think of, which approach or which modality is the most likely to be implemented and implemented well, given all of these factors, right? And then I think, there's other things to consider where I learned about AAC pretty early on, because I've specialized in autism for, about 12 years. But getting familiar with, insurance reimbursement for devices and understanding, how that works, and building up a library of different high and low tech options so that you can trial things when you're doing an assessment. Those are things where I think that one of the barriers for SLPs is, you have individuals who specialize in autism and maybe have a pretty high percentage of their clients that have AAC. And so there's some return on investment of really diving into that information and having all of the tools you need to provide a really comprehensive AAC evaluation. But if you have an SLP where maybe one of their clients is, using an AAC device, I find that it's pretty challenging. And I know in North Carolina, I see it all the time here. I've stopped doing as much speech. So it's really hard because I'm like, okay, this kid needs an evaluation and I can't find anyone. Or someone shows up and it's like you described. I mean, it's still all we do is lamp for everyone. And so, I think AAC assessment is something, that where we definitely could use some work to again, figure out how to create more access to those assessments, and really comprehensive assessments, not, kind of pigeonholing someone to a specific modality because that's what you have experience with or have access to.
Yeah. I mean, and I definitely see people overgeneralizing that to, I won't name out modalities, but if a BCBA is the first line of, I can tell on certain consult cases, I'll be like, oh, well, who helped with that? It's just what you're used to, maybe the training that your district paid for a long time ago.
Right.
But I know, I'm a school-based SLP 2 days a week now in my kids' own school, which is fun. And, for a school-based SLP to have the capacity and bandwidth to do, I actually did. I'm very proud to say I helped a kid in a district from the start of the evaluation, trialed the different devices, wrote the, report, medical necessity, the whole thing, and got it covered through his insurance. But it takes a lot, right? And then sometimes you have to utilize your resources. Like I was telling people on probably the intro to AAC talk that where I lived here in the Cleveland area, we had somebody who was helping in our county. And so that was their whole entire job to do AAC and go out to the county. This fall, we're having, probably by the time this airs, we'll have already had this talk, but somebody from Pranky Romick, because I do like LAMP, is coming to just do a talk on some of the different funding options. Because just like you said, there's so many things to know, and speech therapists are just in demand, and we have a lot on our plate, and it's hard to be the specialist in that. So I think sometimes finding the person. Interesting you say that about North Carolina, because I have a friend who owns a practice down in North Carolina who offers ABA and would love to offer speech, but she's not able to find a speech therapist. I wonder, is your state in a shortage of speech therapists, or it just seems that way?
Yeah, I think so. Overall, we're in a bit of a shortage, especially in school systems. But even so, a lot of the SLPs that I've, collaborated with don't have a lot of experience with AAC. They don't know what to do about it. And I'm pretty open to pretty much any modality of AAC.
Right.
But I think it does matter what you're experienced in, because if you don't know something, how are you going to teach it to an RBT or a parent or another therapist or a teacher? How are you going to get everybody else using it if you don't know how to use it? So I think that that's an issue. And I think in SLP programs, we might get an AAC class, that they do. But whether that equates to knowing how to, honestly, I had this conversation with my PhD advisor of, some of these graduate programs not really giving enough practical experience in actually using these assessment and intervention skills, and are we really preparing these SLPs to go out into the world,
Yeah.
but that's a bigger issue.
Yeah, because I'm thinking back to when I was in school, which was like 2001. Oh boy.
Right.
And I had an intro to AAC course, but I think it was like an elective. It wasn't not
Same.
everybody had to take it. And that's another reason sometimes BCBAs upset me, where I haven't heard this a lot lately, but in real life, where somebody would just be a BCBA would be like, really like, well, how does that speech therapist not understand about AAC or understand about this kid with autism who has like profound autism or something? And I'm like, do you understand that I never took a course in autism? Like never, not one time.
There's a huge lack of understanding about our scope of practice, which is something that I think as a field we need to kind of figure out, right? When you have that big of a scope of practice, you're putting out a jack of all trades and master of none, realistically. But I think there is a little bit of a lack of understanding and this assumption that every SLP should know everything,
Yeah. I tried to train on that and say like, here, look, speech therapist, this is all that BCBAs have to do, and see all that supervision and, and look, BCBAs, this is what speech therapists have to do. Look, we have to take an entire class about phonetics, and we have to transcribe somebody who no one can understand their speech. And we have to, do a language sample and transcribe things. And there's no tips and tricks, you know what I mean? So these are full-fledged positions, people.
Right.
We could go on and on about that. The next question I wanted to talk to you about is something that I see sometimes, on social media. I go back to that because I'm there a lot. But can you share the difference between AAC, kind of just discussing AAC, rapid prompting method, which I actually had when I lived in Austin, Texas. That is where Soma, I think, who created that, lives. So I kind of lived that experience of trying to support students who were doing that. Spelling to communicate and facilitated communication. I think sometimes people don't understand how those all work.
Right.
Or what that is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, I think that the major difference, is exactly that, the level of facilitation. And I think, when you're looking at spelling to communicate, what we mean by that for spelling to communicate or facilitated communication, rapid prompting method, you usually have someone either holding a letterboard or a keyboard, or holding even the individual's arm, supporting it. And these are all pseudoscientific techniques. And, I've actually been engaging in a really fun conversation on social media, of course, about, pseudoscience, and making sure that providers are equipped to recognize and understand pseudoscience. And despite the fact that, ASHA has this position statement about these things, it's still pretty surprisingly widely used. And this is an issue because I think our responsibility as professionals is to really protect autistic individuals' autonomy. Individuals that have disabilities are already, experiencing diminished autonomy in so many different ways. And using facilitated communication and those other types of approaches, you end up in these positions where, at least what the minimal studies we have shown, is that it's usually the facilitator that's communicating the message, right? And that's, a high risk there that we're taking. And our goal should always be, spontaneous and independent communication. So again, we do hear, again, one of those catchphrases like, this is the individual's voice, and it is. And so we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reflect that.
Yeah, because I think that, parents will ask me. I remember I was working with a kid who had selective mutism and had a really great rapport with the family, worked with him for a while. And we worked with this really cool place called the Smart Center. And they were actually what they shared about was like very ABA. I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. I was loving it. I love working with that consultant. I worked in these like high profile districts. And, but the mom asked me, she asked me about spelling to communicate. And it's hard because it's like, and you'll see, because I'm sure our mutual friend is like sharing it on some of our Facebook groups, like this person's a BCBA and they're sharing about telling to communicate, or they're, this is a SLP and they know this is pseudoscience, but we know that that's how that all goes. It's sad, and I was actually just at an autism conference last month, and it was not ABA focused. It was just autism, but they had some ACE courses, and a speech therapist came up to me and she was just talking about how she thought there was a little something to spelling to communicate. And, I just listen and, try to, I honestly, I don't know much about that one, but I know that it falls into that pseudoscience, and falls into like, let's share about AAC and all those things. So thank you, because I think sometimes people don't understand the difference between all those, and AAC is where we want to put our energy, right? Because it's evidence-based, and the idea of implementing it, and kind of like, we talk about that in our course, like, device abandonment is very real. If it's just getting the device is actually just the beginning of the communication journey, right? It's not the end. It's not the finish line.
No. And I think that that's really like a pretty foundational issue that I run into. It's like, theoretically, we sort of talk about AAC as if AAC is the intervention, but realistically, AAC is the modality. And we're using these combination of focused interventions, like prompt fading or differential reinforcement or shaping and these different things. And, we have to simultaneously be teaching things like engagement and joint attention and increasing a reinforcer repertoire, or else you don't have anything to communicate about, right? So it's a really, really complex beast. But I think when we get stuck and we're not really thinking about AAC as a modality versus like AAC as an intervention, I think that really leads to some of these spelling to communicate or facilitated communication that are more like target or marketed as an intervention, right? Where it's a little bit of a mixed bag otherwise, with the exception, of course, of like PECS, which is a manualized intervention and replicable and all of that, right? But
Yeah, that's a good thought. I like that as the modality, because we're still teaching. Like, I have this really popular, we call it a lead magnet in online business world, but it's just like a freebie. You put your email in, I send it to you. It's an autism IEP goal bank, like across the lifespan. And people really like it just for inspiration. Obviously it should be individualized, but, and sometimes people will ask me like, how does that translate to AAC? But it's like, these things can all be worked on with AAC. It doesn't have to be like, just, you could put the AAC in there, it doesn't have to be, it's like just good teaching. This is just, and then like on the other end of the spectrum, you'll have people who will email me and argue about like, well, if I show the student a picture and they use their device is it attacked or are they matching?
Right.
I'm like, you know what? I'm not
the weeds.
Going there. I don't get into the weeds on that kind of stuff because I'd rather focus on more people understanding AAC. Like, I'm not in those nuanced conversations.
I have that conversation all the time, because I feel like in autism, one thing that comes up a lot is, how do you handle, these automatic behaviors or scripting or stimming on the device? And I, every single time, ask, how would you do it if it was vocal stereotypy? What would you do? Because it's literally the exact same thing. How would you handle that? How would you approach it? But I think, like you said, it's the same teaching that we do for vocal communication.
I think people just get nervous about it, but hopefully this podcast helped. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. If people have any questions about you or your work, I know that I found we're friends on Facebook, but I found a nice talk here to kind of help guide our conversation today, because there's so many things we can talk about. Do you have like a website or an email where people could contact you?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm mostly doing my PhD, so I'm not doing as much clinical work, but I can still be found on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me, or you can email me at jjarrett@unc.edu.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It was great to talk and connect.
Absolutely. Thanks for this.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.